Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Chat with Ann. I hope you have some nice snack because I definitely did. My favorite snacks are these rice cakes. They're so good with some tea. They're perfect breakfast and especially after a nice heavy meal. By the way, have you seen my previous episode? If you do not know what I was talking about, then definitely go to my channel and check out my previous Coffee and Chat sessions. Don't be left out. All right, to today's topic. If you buy a used or vintage sewing machines, sometimes the machine does not come with all the pressure feet. So for this week's discussions, I want to bring up some of the pressure feet I found very helpful when sewing bags, and hopefully that help you get the correct foot for your machines, as well as you don't have to buy every sewing pressure feet out there. You can buy just the specific one you need. The most common pressure foot I use is a straight stitch pressure foot or a zigzag pressure foot. Now, a straight stitch and a zigzag could both be used for a straight stitch. The only difference is that the zigzag foot has a wider gap instead of a hole like the straight foot stitch. And therefore, in a zigzag foot, you can do zigzag stitches. So if you don't want to change it out between sewing zigzag and straight stitch, you can always keep a zigzag foot on the sewing machines. I am lazy, so I usually leave the zigzag foot on my sewing machine instead of the straight stitch foot. That way it allows me flexibility to play around with zigzag stitch when I want or do a straight stitch. The second foot I found very helpful is a zipper foot. A zipper foot is handy when you install a zipper. The reason for that is that it allows you to get as close to the zipper teeth when stitching as you can. In a zigzag foot or a straight stitch, you really can't get that close to the zipper teeth. The third pressure feet that are commonly used in the industry for bag makers is a walking foot. Now, I do not have a walking foot, so it's not really like that necessary or you must have, but a lot of people have found it very helpful, especially when feeding multiple layers of fabrics. If you have a hard time feeding multiple layers of fabrics through your sewing machines, even with the pressure adjustment on your pressure feet, then you might want to consider a walking foot. What's so special about the walking foot is that it has a feed dock built into the foot. And so as you feed the fabrics through the sewing machines, you have the bottom feed dock of your sewing machines, and then the walking foot has its own feed dock, which then helps synchronize and feed your fabric through. It isn't essential, but it's great for sewing with multiple layers, or especially like when you quilt, because it helps evenly feed your fabric and prevent fabrics from slipping through multiple layers as you feed it through. The fourth pressure foot I found very handy is a roller foot. The roller foot has rollers built in, so that helps roll your fabric through when you feed it. So if you have like sticky fabrics or slippery fabric or like wax canvas specifically, when you feed it through the sewing machines, it will have a hard time like gripping sometimes because you do not have that, feed dock on top. So the roller foot helps roll the fabric through evenly as your feed dock on your sewing machine pushes it through. Those are all the pressure feeds I found very helpful. I would say if you are to start out, just stick with the zigzag foot or a straight stitch. I personally do not have a walking foot, and the reason I don't want one is because of how bulky it is. If you have a low shank sewing machines and you add that walking foot to it, which has a feed dock and of course it's bulky, then it's reduce the space you could have to feed your fabric through, right? Because now you have this giant bulky thing on top of your pressure foot, right? So play around with it, consider it, maybe ask a friend who has a walking foot and then try to see if you could try it out and see if you love it. I personally don't see any difference. I have not struggled with being fabric true. The only thing I found helpful is a roller foot, which is a lot cheaper than a walking foot. So if you want to try it out and you don't want to really spend the money right away, maybe give the roller foot a try. Now onto needles. For needles, you need a variety of size. This is because when sewing with cotton, you will have thick cotton, multiple layers of cotton canvas, duck canvas, or you even could have quilting cotton. Depending on the thickness of the material, you might need different needles for different times. The size I recommend for needles, usually if you just go with cotton canvas that's thick, stick with 100/16 or heavier. I found at the size 16, it worked for me in every scenario, except when I sew through multiple layers of duck canvas. So that is when I go up a higher, heavier needle, which is like size 18s or size 19s. If you look at the needle size, they usually display a size in like 3 digits and 2 digits. The 3 digits was like the 100 or 110, 120. Those are European size number. And then the 16, 18, 19, 20, those 2-digit numbers are usually the American size. They're always the same. So if you get a size 16, then it always lists 100 next to the 16. I don't know why we have 2 different measurement numerical size. Why can't we just stick with one uniform size? But that's just how it works, the European side and then the American side. So just keep that in mind when you look at needles. Maybe figure it out for yourself and just stick with no number. I usually call my needle size 16, 18, or 19. And that's how I usually do it because it's shorter to say and it's just easier to remember. It's one less digit to remember. You know what I'm saying? If you are going to use a linen fabric that is like made of cotton, like quilting cotton, use a side needle 80 or 11 or 80/size 12. There's not really a huge difference between 80/11/80/12 because if you buy individual needles, you could buy 80/12, but if you buy a multiple pack, like a single multiple pack needles, it usually will provide a size 80 and 11. Size 80/11 have a slightly finer tips, like sharpness, than an 80/12. And it's commonly used for lightweight to medium weights. Say 80/12 could be used just for a slightly heavier fabric, but it's very small differences. So don't sweat over trying to find an 80/12 if your kit or your package of needle you bought comes with only size 80/12 or 80/11 actually, correction. We talk about needle size, let's talk about needle types. There's a varieties of needles like universal needles, jeans, denim, leathers. There's also like microtex, super universal. So there's a varieties of sewing needle types. What are they, right? So the first one is universal. This is fine. Universal needles works fine with bag making, especially with cotton canvas or duck canvas, and I did not have any issue with them. The only time that I see that you might not want universal needle, if you are making like a lot of bags from leather. I personally use universal needles for making bags, as well as mending jeans or sewing any projects I have around the house. I even did an elastic sew over tops. I did a string sew. I also did some vinyl sewing with universal needle, and I do not have issues. So I recommend if you are beginners, sticks with universal needle. Now, if you are sewing a lot with denims or jeans and you want to have like some needles, they do come, you could buy them in a package that's called jeans and denims. Jeans and denims needles have a sharper point and a stronger shaft than a universal needles. That's because when they puncture through jeans, it have to have that sharpness. So I use universal needle all the times. I never have any issues. However, what will happen is that when I use sewing tapes, I notice my universal needle actually gets sticky after hours of sewing, like not even hours of sewing actually. After a little bit of sewing over where I use sewing tapes, and then it skips stitches. it just skipped stitches, and I couldn't figure out why. I thought, oh, maybe the needle was dual, or my bobbins has lint in it, but it turns out it was the sewing tapes. So if you are going to use sewing tapes a lot, get yourself a microtex needles or a super universal needles. For months, I couldn't use sewing tapes to hold in my zipper in place because I couldn't figure out why whenever I used sewing tapes, my universal needle would skip stitches. It turns out it was my needle. So when I discovered this, it was such a winner. The reason why the microtex needle works is because the sharp fine points helps prevent buildup on the needle when sewing through sewing tapes. In addition, its precision sewing leave a small hole. So because of that small hole, it pulls up less fabric and less adhesive, basically, when you sew with it, right? So then that's why it works in that scenario. The adhesive part of the sewing tapes, when stuck to the needle, is what caused the needle to skip stitches when you sew with sewing tapes. Can you believe that? That was just a simple fix, and I forever hated myself because I just stopped using sewing tapes. Microtex needles are sharper than universal. They have a very sharp fine points, and they have a slimmer shaft. So therefore, because of their fine points, they can go through the fabric very precise. And then of the slimmer shaft, when they pull off the fabric, they don't pull up as much adhesive as a universal needle. This type of needles are usually used for precise stitching or top stitchings. And the way how they're designed make it work. Super universal needles has a non-stick coating on them, making them works in a scenario where you use sewing tapes because the non-stick coating helps prevent them from pulling up all the adhesive from the sewing tapes when you sew with them, which then prevent skip stitches. This type of needle is great for sewing with materials such as laminated, anything that's slippery, that's hard to grip, vinyls, sticky material as well, laminated materials. The reason you need so many different needle size when sewing back, even if you're making back with just one type of material, is because if you use the wrong needle size, for example, a size 18, which is meant for heavy duty fabric or thicker fabric on a quilting con, what will happen is you will end up puncturing bigger holes than you want on the fabric, because remember, quilting con is a lot thinner than con canvas. And because of that, you can cause some damage to the fabric, and you could even see through those giant holes, right? So you don't want that. And lastly, you could also cause a fabric to fray unnecessary, or thinning out the fabric because you're making bigger holes. It could also cause fabric to have a more tendency to rip. Another thing that could happen is, let's say you use a larger needles on a thin, lightweight materials. What will happen is that it could distort the fabric. Sometimes when you use incorrect needles on a fabric, it could cause skip stitches. Wrong needle size can also cause the thread to have bad tensions, where the thread does not sit snugly onto the fabric. It's because as it puncturing through, it doesn't get that full grips, and when they combine with the bobbins, so they could cause it to have that bad tensions. It can also cause needle breakage. Let's say you use size like 11 on a multiple layers of con canvas. Well, your sewing machines is putting a lot of power and pressure to puncture that fabric, right? And your needle shaft is thin because size 11 is thinner than size 16. The higher the size, the thicker the shaft. If you have a thin shaft, what will happen is you have this full pressure and force pushing on it, but the fabric cannot be puncturing through. What will happen to the needle is that it will break. And this could be dangerous because the tips could fly around and hit you in the eye or in your face. So it's very crucial that you use the proper needle size when sewing. Lastly, the worst case scenario is that it could also damage your sewing machines. Using an incorrect needle size can damage the bobbin case or the bobbins within, and also ruin your sewing machine timing, which you do not want to reset that because it is quite a complicated process because I have to do that once and I never want to do it again because it's not a fun part. You have to perfectly time it and it sucks. You have to take all your screw apart. You have to take the whole sewing machine apart and it's not fun. Trust me. I did it once because I got the sewing machines and I did not use the right needle size when I first started learning how to sew. And I'm pretty sure I screw up the timing and then I have to fix it because if you screw up the timing, every time it punctured through the fabric and it go into the bobbin, it just hit the bobbin case. It doesn't even go through and get a thread up. It just hit the bobbin case and you're like, I can't sew anymore with my sewing machine. So make sure you use the right needle size. How can you tell that a sewing needles need to be replaced after several hours of sewing? You could definitely time it. It is recommended that you change out your sewing needle after 8 hours of sewing. Okay, but then who timed their needles? The sewing machine does not have a timer on it. So how can you time when you last changed your needle and how many hours you sew? Come on, right? So here are some tips beside that 8 hours time. Tip number 1, when your stitches start to skip. If your stitches start to skip and you know for sure you use the right needle size and for the right materials types, then you want to change your needle. Number 2 is when your sewing machine starts to make this popping or kind of clicking noise, kind of like cranky noise, that's when you know. Number 3, it becomes harder for you to puncture to the materials, even though you know for sure you used the right needle size. Number 4, when your needle looks slightly bent. Okay, this is quite hard to notice, especially if you do not have a straight needle to compare it to, but you will see it, trust me. You will see that your needle is slightly bent because what will happen is it will hit the sewing foot on the side. It will not be in the middle center how you start sewing. When we change out our needle, we know for sure the needle is perfectly aligned with the pressure foot. So all of a sudden when you start sewing, it starts to hit on the side or hit on the other side or hit the front or hit the back, then you know it's slightly bent. So those are the tips I learned to recognize when a needle is slightly bent. Number 5, when the needle starts hitting the bobbin case or hooks. This is because when the needle is slightly bent and you did not see it and it goes through the pressure foot fine, it doesn't hit any side of the pressure foot's gap, then it will go through the bottom and it will hit the bobbin case or hooks because it's bent. So this is the sign you also need to change your needle. As I mentioned, the general rule is that you change your needle after 8 hours of sewing. But how can we properly measure that, right? So hopefully those tips I provided helps you identify when your sewing needles need changing. Well, okay, I think that's it for this week. I don't have any other topics to discuss for this week. If you have any topics or questions you would like me to answer or discuss in our next Coffee and Chat, leave me a comments down below. Don't be scared. I am here for you to help you learn how to become a best bag maker you can be, and I'm here to learn with you along the way. Until next time, bye!